And as I learned in Japan when staying with a rice farming family in Tajima, white rice, the processed form devoid of nutrients, which you know from your trips to the sushi bar and from Uncle Ben, remained a ceremonial delicacy, with the bulk of people's diet still coming from the enormous variety of animals and plants that make up the traditional Asian diet. Where the Middle Easterners wrote religious tomes about our daily bread and had to warn their acolytes, but man does not live by bread alone, and prisoners were at best fed on bread and water, the Asian countries celebrated diversity in both cultivation and consumption. And that may be the key to why their politics never became as overtly conquistador as the Middle Eastern Mediterranean empires and their European descendants up north, playing back into our observation that China only used its gunpowder for ceremonial fireworks. What if that's the key to a kinder, gentler politics? Keep the things that can do the most harm ceremonial, and feed your gut and your mind with staples that actually increase the common good. Forget what you learned in high school about how all civilizations eventually collapse. Look at what the history books actually say. For example, this excerpt from William R. Nestor's 2010 textbook, Globalization, History of the Modern World. He writes, quote, "The first civilization emerged in Mesopotamia around 5000 BC, and for the next 6,500 years or so, great civilizations there and elsewhere rose, extended their rule, then collapsed for a variety of interrelated political, technological, economic, military, and ecological reasons." During the 15th century, beyond Christian Europe, advanced and powerful civilizations sprawled across vast stretches of the globe. Ming China, Aztec Mexico, Inca Peru, Benin Africa, Mughal India, Ashikaga Japan, and Ottoman Asia Minor. In Southeast Asia alone, there was a patchwork of smaller civilizations like the Khmer, Thai, Vietnamese, Burmese, and Javanese. All of these non-European civilizations were ruled by centralized bureaucracies and had achieved enormous advances in technology, the arts, philosophy, and wealth. However, despite their dazzling accomplishments, none of the non-European civilizations developed the related psychological, philosophical, and technological prerequisites for modernity and global conquest. End quote. Haven't you ever asked yourself why? You see that the European eugenicists and social Darwinists, desperate to justify the conquests, turned to several bizarre pseudoscientific ideas. The first were that humans that were actually composed of different races, by which they really tried to implicate species, aware that technically the fact that people can and do intermarry and have fertile children proves we're all the same species. But they wanted to forbid such miscegenation, intermarriage, and were desperate to prove that the other races were somehow inferior, rather than simply better behaved, to explain away the uncomfortable fact that only they, the Middle Earthers from the Middle East and Europe, direct descendants of and inheritors of the cultures of the Roman Empire and the wheat growers, were hell-bent on conquering and enslaving the rest of the world. What really motivated such brutality? Well, the easy answer is money, but money's just a symbol for some kind of wealth exchange, and previous civilizations had monetary economies that didn't inevitably lead to such political conflict that wars resulted, and trade actually did more to bring cultures together than divide them. There were plenty of ways to earn money without going around committing genocide or enslaving people. In fact, these seem to be really risky ways to build an economy or get rich. So I have my own theories, gleaned from researching classic books like Botany of Desire and The Omnivore's Dilemma and Second Nature by Michael Pollan, or like William Duffy's Sugar Blues and Sweetness and Power, The Place of Sugar in Modern History by the anthropologist Sidney Mintz, and Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by the anthropologist-dentist Weston Price, and of course, Against the Grain, How Agriculture Has Hijacked Civilization, that great book by Richard Manning. Go further into the past, to Samuel Butler's Erewhon, and consider them in light of Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene and the Extended Phenotype. Take these books and watch the recent film Little Joey and put them all together and see what you get. These books and other research suggest that agriculture really did hijack civilization, that grains and crystallized juices from one plant family out of the 463 that humans used to consume in their omnivorous, biodiverse diet hijacked civilization. Sugarcane, wheat, rice, corn, oats, barley, Think of how much you consume from these in a day, every month, all year, over your entire life. All grasses, member of the same grass family, Poaceae graminae, all disturbance species that flourish after fires and floods but disappear when the forest returns. Think of all you're willing to do to get them, to grow them, to nurture and process them. Crusades to the Middle East, conquest of India, the establishment of a brutal slave trade to grow them in the Caribbean and the American South and in South America. It's like Manning claims in his book title and argument, as though this one family of plants hijacked civilization, took us over, colonized our minds, parasitized our bodies, and made us work for them, clearing the forests and prairies, burning and raping the land to grow endless plantations of sugarcane and vast cornfields and rice paddies, and worst of all, because of the addictive gluten compounds in them, amber waves of grain, wheat from sea to shining sea. It even made it into the American anthem. Certainly, the growing of grains and other grasses has had the greatest impact on our climate. That's where all the fossil-fueled machinery and fossil fuel-derived fertilizers and pesticides are devoted. That's what all the soil-destroying plowing is for, to create disturbance that only weedy grasses are adapted to. It is this monarch family monoculture that's responsible for 90% of industrial agriculture and its excesses. Hell, we even grow them now to feed our cattle and pigs and chickens, animals that evolved in the forest eating shrubs and leaves and rooting for truffles and grubs. All of us, we and the animals, now are fed on grains and sugar. They're in everything. Even our gut microbiome has evolved to stay addicted to them, like the gut of a lactose-drinking infant. And if we don't get them when we want them, we throw a tantrum, just like a baby, and we get violent. The East certainly got addicted to rice, and the West got addicted to corn, and it led to big problems in their societies, but for most of their history, they stayed away from conquest. It was in the Middle East and Middle Europe, what we consider here the ecological north, that an uncontrolled experiment with the grains of the wheat plant began 10,000 years ago, and quickly after we see the rise of conquering empires. Their diet of daily bread and sugar-infused wheat products, cakes and cookies, is now a global phenomenon. And with it, land everywhere has been transformed to grow as much grain as possible, and climate change has resulted. I've wondered now for more than 40 years after visiting my first tropical rainforest and coral reef ecologies as a 17-year-old student at the Forfar Field Station on Andros Island in the Bahamas, and learning firsthand about the threats of deforestation and overfishing, what might really be driving our greed? If it was really hunger, a true hunger, a lack of vital cell-building proteins and lipids, would we see such food waste? So many rotting corpses and half-eaten and completely uneaten portions of the precious vertebrates and invertebrates that we claim we need to feed the world? Or does greed and waste come from somewhere else? A place not of true hunger, but of addiction. A few years later, as a college student, I was on a field expedition to study the ecologies of Venezuela. On that trip, we went to watch the rainforest being burned and cut down. And for what? A sugarcane plantation. I was appalled, and the experience galvanized my resolve to eliminate sugar from my diet. I'd been taught about the rainforest beef connection, but had never given a thought to the role my soda and cookie habits were having on the rainforests that I claim to love so much. What are we going to tell our grandchildren, I thought, that we wiped out all the unique biodiversity on this planet for things as trivial as Halloween candy and birthday cakes and desserts? The only hopeful part of that month-long Venezuela trip was meeting a rancher who was exploring traditional sources of meat, indigenous sources of meat, as alternatives to the non-native beef cattle. At one point, we came over a rise in the forest on a jungle trail and looked down over what seemed like a mosaic of forest and beautiful purple-hued perennial pampas grasses, the deep-rooted cordaderia that we now use as ornamental plants outside PCGS, along a winding river meandering through a glistening wetland. And we saw what seemed to be a large herd of cattle moving up the river uphill toward us like a stampede. I wondered how long they would take to reach us and if we shouldn't try to get the hell out of the way. And then the first of the livestock the rancher was cultivating went whizzing by me on my right and another on my left, and I suddenly realized that these cattle were not only about half my height, but weren't cattle at all. They were capybara, the world's largest rodents. Our host said, "Normally people drain the swamps and wetlands and cut down and burn the trees to raise these foreign Middle Eastern and European cattle that the Spaniards brought around the world. But our native animals evolved with our ecologies. And if we can get people to go back to eating rodents like this, and the tepesquintli, which traditional peoples ate, smaller rodents, there won't be any deforestation or wetland destruction at all. The same is true of eating alligators and crocodiles. Such a meat industry, done right, would encourage more natural habitat. The only real problem is one of taste. Modernist European-influenced diets don't care much for reptiles and rodents, do they?" Perhaps, I thought, meatless Mondays for the climate should be turned into multi-species meats on Mondays instead. A day to celebrate eating a wider variety of life forms, certified, of course, as coming from thriving habitats. Both are tough sells politically, and with the huge cattle ranching culture we've built in North, Central, and South America, it's difficult to see how the capybara rancher was going to succeed. It's been 35 years since I was at that wetland forest ranch, and when I returned to Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina recently with National Geographic, we went to see capybara in what's left of the wild. But when we went for a traditional lunch to an eco ranch studded with windmills and solar panels and efforts to create some silvopasture, what we were fed was huge slabs of, you guessed it, Argentinian beef, being roasted on huge outdoor charcoal fires the way the Spaniards always did it, with lots of home-baked breads and lots of waste. The meal would have made both vegetarians and biodiversity championing omnivores cringe. For the time being, drawdown solution number 4, plant-rich diet and eat less meat, remains extremely important. It's ranked number 4 because many people believe that meat is the real murder, as the futuristic documentary Carnage shows with such dark humor. In this movie, it predicts a future where we look back at the agricultural production patterns and food consumption habits of the previous millennia and the 20th century in particular with shame and revulsion, likening our former selves as barbarians. Cowspiracy, Okja, Super Size Me, Food Inc., The Game Changers, Raw, Earthlings, Forks Over Knives, What the Health. All these movies do a similarly good job in forcing us to confront why we're doing what we're doing to other animals and to our ecosystem, Earthsea, and start questioning whether it's worth it. I sympathize. I had a conversation with a young man from India one day in Indonesia when I was with my Muslim Indonesian surrogate family slaughtering a goat for one of the Eids, or religious festivals. He was a vegetarian, and he was appalled by the killing. He said, "You know, eating meat is what makes people aggressive. The animal feels fear and anger when you take its life, and it passes it on to you when you eat meat. If we could get people to give up being carnivores, give up meat, we could not only stop climate change and save the planet, but stop warfare and violence too," he said.